What do oil, coffee beans, and cobalt have in common? You guessed it, they're part of the lucrative commodity trading business in Switzerland that contributes around 25 billion Swiss francs in revenue to the Swiss economy. Represents 3.8% of the Swiss GDP and provides numerous jobs in all regions of the country. So, in short, big business, but also big controversies. The Swiss government recently published what they describe as a world premiere, a new best practice guide for commodity trading called A Guidance on Implementing the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Joining me now is Stéphane Graber. He's Secretary General of STSA, which is a Swiss Trading and Shipping Association, but otherwise known as the Commodity Traders Lobby. In a nutshell, did this new guidance meet your approval? And that, of course, of your lobbyists in the group, members of the STSA.
Yeah, so I think yes, because if we go back to the history of this guidance, it's the publication in 2013 of the background report, Federal Background Report on Commodities, that was asking to set up a multi-stakeholder group to look at the implementation of international guidance in human rights. And we discuss it long with the board of STSA, and we said, yes, it's a good idea. It's a good idea because we saw that commodity trading activities are not well known from the public in general. The system is in place in the companies for managing operational risk, including human rights, were not known. And it's a good opportunity to try to codify all this practice into the supply chain and to help also the company to understand the expectation towards human rights.
So basically, you feel like that previous federal publication that you mentioned that happened now 5 years ago was more about explaining the situation. I mean, giving people an insight into how the industry worked.
So I think there are a lot of misconceptions about commodity trading in Switzerland. And people think they are people that don't care about the way they do business. They are there to do business and to earn money. And in fact, the business has a lot evolved in recent years. There are systems in place in companies. There are due diligence systems, know your customer, know your business approach. There are a lot of third-party checking. So there are really, it's an industry that has completely embraced all the due diligence and the compliance that is required today, as we have it in the financial industry as well. So it's really something that we thought we are able to work at it. It's demanding. It's not just about communicating what we do. It's also about thinking of the UNGP. UNGP is the UN Guiding Principle for Business and Human Rights. Is pretty new. It was voted unanimously in 2011 in the UN. At that time, companies were more looking at IFC performance standards, at Global Compact and other schemes. And today, it's only 5-6 years old. So we don't have the understanding of how this is implemented in activities. And we said, OK, let's try. We are the first economic activity in Switzerland to try that, to say, let's see it with NGOs and not the most easy one. So also the most voicey. Let's try to understand and to improve the understanding of the business, to also understand what are the challenges in human rights, and to prioritize and try to, through examples, best practices, try to help the companies to have something to understand what is expected from them.
All right, you touched on several topics that I want to get into a little bit further on in the interview. But if you don't mind that we just back this up for a moment. I mean, so when this first publication again came out 5 years ago, they said that as the industry increases in size, it brings these additional challenges of human rights. For example, so let's look at this. Do you feel like this new guidance has addressed the issue of human rights?
So the issue of human rights is a very complicated one, and we have to see that we have to find the right balance between being able to bring commodities in high-risk area and doing it in respecting human rights, in mitigating human rights risk. And today it's really to find this balance. Sometimes in discussion with NGOs, they say, oh, if there are issues in a country, you just have to withdraw of this country. And that's something that is impossible. Because if you do that, you also harm human rights. We see today with sanctions...
By taking jobs, I assume. Or...
By leaving the country and by not organizing the supply of commodities that are vital, being food commodities or even energy. It's vital for these economies, for these countries. So you have to find the right balance between ensuring the flow of commodities and the supply of commodities to the population that needs it, and at the same time, respecting and preserving human rights. And that's something where the UNGPs, the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, are really very innovative because they are more focused on the process. It's a requirement of process rather than a requirement of results. Because when you say requirements of result today, guaranteeing that in your business activity you are not somewhere doing some harm or having a human rights issue, you cannot. You cannot. You are in a high-risk area. Right. You might encounter some human rights issue. So if your obligation would be to say you should not do anything that might cause some human rights issue, you have only one solution, is to withdraw, which is the contrary that the effect that is targeted, because you harm the population and you create other human rights issue by withdrawing. So the UNGPs, they really try to help the companies to engage in a process where companies have a duty to respect human rights, to assess human rights risk, and to mitigate those risks by prioritizing where they have a leverage and where they have also the highest risk to have an issue with human rights.
Okay, then how would a Swiss commodity company, trading commodity company, how would you be able to actually know that these guidance principles are being implemented in these countries of origin? Like, how can you determine the success of this?
The guidance, it's a kind of toolbox. It tries to explain what are the requirements in business and in human rights for companies. It tries, as I said, to codify existing practices, because a lot of companies had already some practices in place, some due diligence, some risk assessment, right. So including human rights. And it just helped them to codify that in the supply chain, to look if they have well organized their risks, they know what are their risks, they know where they have leverage, where they can act, and to help them also with the best the example that are given in the guidance, to see, yes, they could use this in order to fulfill this expectation. So it gives a lot of examples how companies have dealt with that, because you said in your introduction, the sector is very diverse. It's a collection of different activities, of different commodities. The business model are very different. Sure. Depending on the commodities, the supply chain are not the same. So it's very difficult to, and it's not to an association like us to say to the company, you have to do like that. It depends on all companies, but we have to provide them the access to an understanding what is required, what is expected in human rights, how can you deal with that, give them example, possibilities, so that they can then use that, benchmark their internal policy, because it's also about that. This guidance will help them to benchmark their policies and to improve their risk management systems.
And this new system, is this less of a self-regulating guidance? Because before it was basically, we trust you to do what's best. What is the attitude?
It's interesting because we had a big debate during 1 year with some of the members of the multi-stakeholder group, saying, yes, but it's not mandatory, it's voluntary, so it has no value. We need to have legalization of these requirements. And in fact, we told them, but the guidance, once it exists, it will become a benchmark. It will be used by all the stakeholders in commodity trading to benchmark the policies and practices of the companies towards human rights. And once you take this guidance you apply it and you take it into your policies, it becomes mandatory for a company. So from the beginning, we said it's completely not relevant to discuss about is it voluntary or not, because as we are sitting at the table, we committed to that, and this will become a benchmark. It will become mandatory for the companies.
But who is going to be the one overseeing whether or not it's being implemented? Is there going to be?
There will be the follow-up of the group and the work of the states, because the states will continue. It's part of this of a national action plan of Switzerland, because the state has also some human rights obligation. It has the obligation to defend the human rights of the population. The companies have the obligation to respect human rights. So it's two different things. Then it's an industry, for example, to take an example, that is very much financed by traditional bank loans, document credit loans from banks. It's a study of the University of Geneva that shows that 80% of the financing comes from banks' loans on credit documentary. It's uncommitted and secured, but uncommitted means a bank can anytime say, I don't finance this transaction. And the banks, they look at each transaction separately. They do their very detailed due diligence, and they have also the obligation, if they see something suspect, something that is not right, to tell it to the authorities and to say, here there is something that is going wrong. So it's not only saying we will not finance this transaction, it's also that if they see some wrongdoing, they have this obligation to report it to their regulators. So in fact, it's the whole industry that is self-regulating itself, because you, at one point in time, you are judged also with this guidance and the fact that your policies are in line or not with what is expected regarding today respect of human rights.
Earlier, you mentioned NGOs and how sometimes your relationship with them and their reactions is a bit difficult, so to speak. I mean, I have to bring up the example of Public Eye that released their shadow report the day before this official report came out. And they said saying despite the countless scandals that have hit Swiss commodity trading companies, the government has failed to take effective measures to mitigate corruption and other risks. I mean, this comes out just before the new one is out. It wasn't 5 years ago. It's just very recent. So how valid are these comments in your mind?
I think you have to distinguish between two types of NGOs. You have the NGOs that are more advocacy NGOs, that are there to name and shame, that are probably less looking to collaborate on specific issues, human rights issue, and try to improve a situation. So they do their role. They are there to be voicey. It's their business model as well. So that's fine. You have then other NGOs that are more involved on the ground, that have an expertise, that are very important for the companies, because they can help the companies also to assess their potential human rights impacts, to look at the solution, how they can solve a situation. We see in the process of the UN Guiding Principle that there is a little bit of split between these two types of NGOs. So they are the ones that they stay in their role, And they will continue to stay in their role, to publish report, to say that it's not enough, we need more, we need more.
Which you feel that Public Eye is one of these
Probably
organizations?
Public Eye is in this group. And you have other NGOs that were also involved in this process, because it's a multi-stakeholder process with different organizations.
Does anybody come to mind, any specific
There are lots of them. In the process, we worked, and we work regularly with NGOs like Swiss Aid or Bread for All. Or there are really different NGOs. With you, we can discuss, we can exchange, we can look at where there are improvement. We have now a project with one NGO to look at making the guidance more accessible to companies. We also shared it with the authorities that we could maybe develop a kind of apps, mobile apps, to make it more accessible, the content, to help the companies to find out quicker where they need to have more input, more information, best practices. So, and that's something we need to do with the NGOs. We cannot do it alone because it needs to be to really address the issues, so they have a role to play.
So let's look a little bit about at this role that digitalization is also taking, the emergence of new technologies.
That's completely right.
So how do you plan to affront things like traceability and transparency in the future? Are you looking at things like blockchain, for example?
So I think you're completely right. The challenges like transparency and traceability and some issue we encounter today to address some of the issues linked with these topics, they probably in 5 to 10 years will change because through technology, some of these issues will just be much more easy to deal with.
I mean, especially, a business and industry like commodity trading, which still uses the fax machine.
Yeah, and a lot
in
of
many
paper.
places.
Yes.
So, that's a big jump, right?
Yeah, and probably last year, it's an industry that has more invested in new technologies, in platform like Comgo, Traffic, Voltron, than in the traditional business, because there is really today an opportunity to modernize, to digitalize, to improve the operations of this industry, which means also for the industry shorter transaction time and financial returns, because if your transactions are shorter, your capital block during a transaction is also for a shorter period. So I think there is today a lot of hope in these new technologies.
So
nobody can say today which technology, what kind of benefits.
Well, let me just put it out there to you.
Yeah.
Blockchain nation for commodity trading?
We will see if blockchain, we're discussing in this field of technology, you already hear some voices saying that blockchain is maybe not what we expect, that it will have a role, but not so much that we expected, that there's already new technology appearing. You have also robotics, you have also intelligence, artificial intelligence. So all these areas will completely transform this industry. It's an industry that relies a lot on paper, that is very traditional.
But it's also part of relying on paper is also part of the secrecy involved, right? A bit of the lack of transparency. So I don't know, how willing do you think companies will be to?
Oh, willing they are, because if you look today, and as I said, all the investment that are done in this platform, all the time and resources that are spent in these projects, it's huge. It's really, I think nobody knows what will come out. Nobody knows what the real benefits will be with which technology, but at the end, everybody knows that in 5 to 10 years, if they are not in, they will be out. And even an association like us, we have a platform called EGTSA, Traffic, that was a little bit earlier than all the blockchain development that we had in the last 2 years, that organize authenticated and secured communication between the banks and the commodity traders on all the financing, the letter of credits, and all the exchange on these financial tools. And this is a project where it's more than a project because it's on live, but we work a lot on that. We have a lot of discussion. What can blockchain bring? What can digitalization bring? How does this position itself in a new world? I just think today it's difficult to have a clear view where we go, but it's sure we go somewhere that is different.
Well, and to that point, I mean, there are companies that have made those steps. You know, SocGen and Mercuria have taken initiatives just this past year. We've got HBSC and Cargill's letter of credit, of course, with the blockchain. So yes, I know companies are making a move towards that, but you know, these are just 3-4 companies out of hundreds. So I'm just wondering if that momentum will, in fact, pick up. But
maybe one thing that is important in the commodity trading industry and space, if we take all the actors active around this activity in Switzerland, it's a majority of small and medium companies. 80% of the companies are small and medium. So it's clear we talk a lot of the big ones that are in the 20%, but the industry is more rich, more diverse. And the big ones, they have a role to play because they are leaders. They have the resources also to disrupt an industry. And our role as an association is to be sure that by doing that, we don't lose the rest of the 80%, the SMEs of this industry, and we help them on one topic that is also adapt their systems to the new requirements in business and human rights, and all these aspects we discussed at the beginning, but also in the technology, we ensure that they have solution accessible. And in fact, our solution was developed more in mind of the small ones, because we see today that the small ones, they need to have a tool, and they don't have access to the big project where you need to invest millions because they don't have them.
Right. So the bigger companies are definitely setting the pace, it sounds like, from what you're saying. Now, just to wrap it up, do you find that the commodity trading industry still has a bit of an image problem? For example, the bankers just a few years ago were the bad guys, right? Yeah. And then banking secrecy came around and said, okay, done with that. So seems like their reputation is changing. Yeah, but now commodity traders, are they the new bad guys?
I think it's a very different situation because it's not directly linked to something that the industry would do wrong in such. It's just the lack of knowledge of commodity trading activity.
And why? And transparency.
No, it's a lack of knowledge due to the fact that it's a business-to-business activity. In fact, there is a big issue, and we are faced with that in communication. When you're in a business-to-business activity and your clients are big industrial groups, they want to promote their brands. They don't want to promote the brands of their supplier because that's a competition finally for their brands. On top of that, you are not in direct contact with the clients and the customers, and so they don't know you. And if we take coffee today, everybody knows Nespresso, but nobody knows who are the different suppliers and the name of the company that supply Nespresso in coffee. They supply apart from themselves. They also have procurement of commodities, of coffee, but a big part is coming from our members as well. And it's very difficult because your clients, they have no interest that you start to communicate, to explain what you do, what are your sustainable projects. But
there's no interest, you find.
For them, it's a little bit competing. They want to cap the brand capital for their brands. And so it's always a little bit a situation where you have to find the right balance in trying to explain what is commodity trading. And nobody really cares when they drink their coffee to know that it needed somewhere a commodity traders that bought in advance and advanced the money to the farmer to grow the coffee, that someone take this risk, take the merchandise, then if there was a problem with the quality, had to find another client and had then to bring these goods or these commodities to a Nestlé or Nespresso, and had to storage it, to wait that Nespresso say, today I will produce 200 caps of this, 200,000 million caps of this type of coffee. I need that. And if I don't have that, I don't want your commodities.
To finish up then, if we look at the future of the commodity sector in Switzerland, I mean, Switzerland still remains an attractive place. I mean, 1/3 of the global market share of oil trading happens in Geneva alone. So still attractive, but there's always pressure from other locations like London, for example. I mean, could Brexit really change the situation for London and perhaps create an opportunity, or more opportunity for Geneva?
It will create a lot of difficulties for Switzerland as well. Both places, both commodity hubs are very interlinked. So today we see it with all the financials operations. For example, clearing counterparties that are very much used in UK. Today, these clearing counterparties are recognized by Europe. Tomorrow, in March, it might be that suddenly you have a clearing counterparty there and you don't have the agreement of Europe because UK is out. And so that means you need to find from one day to the other a new clearing counterparties in Europe. So there will be a lot of difficulties and issues. But it's clear that today Switzerland is under big pressure of commodity hubs. There is in the world about 7-8 major places.
Singapore,
hubs, Dubai, Houston, Chicago, it depends on the commodities. Rotterdam, the Holland is very active in commodity as well and in commodity trading. So the gap between Switzerland and other places has reduced. The other one has really improved their business condition environment. And today there is a pressure on Switzerland. Switzerland has also suffered a lot during the last few years with the strength of the Swiss francs, with high operational cost. So I would say today we are happy because Switzerland at least provide a stability, an economic and a political stability that is very important for the business, predictability as well. So that's a good, a real advantage offered by Switzerland in the turmoil we have around us. But at the end, it's really becoming very tough competition. And that's also something highlighted by the Swiss authorities to say we need to continue to look at the business environment and to ensure that we remain competitive in Switzerland.
Thank you so much, Mr. Graber, for your insights tonight.